Good morning, everyone. It looks like we are all assembled. Councillor Wilson indicated that he would not be here today. It is near the first of the month, and I've forgotten the order, but somebody is new deputy mayor for today. Helen. Thank you. I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Order to Jasper. It is 9:30 on March 2nd, 2021. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? If not, might I have a motion, please, then to approve the agenda as presented? I will say Deputy Mayor Keller Harempy got her hand up first. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. The minutes of the regular meeting of February 16th have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? If not, might I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes as presented? Thank you, Councillor McGrath. We've lost Councillor Demota. I'll call the question in any event, and hopefully he will sort out whatever technical issue plagues him. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. I don't see Councillor Demota in the waiting room either, but if he winds up, somebody will spot him and let him in, I trust. We can proceed to agenda item 4 of today's agenda, presentations. The ECC update, and I presume then, Mr. Given, that is you.
Yes, Your Worship, a brief update today, and towards the end I will touch on the reopening stage that was announced yesterday. At our ECC meeting last week, it was reported that generally the situation is normal across all different service areas. Activity levels are normal and typical, really related to what would be maybe slightly less than normal busyness in Jasper, but reflective of the typical calls for service across EMS, RCMP, and fire service. As you'll see, we are now down to 1 current case in Jasper, 1 active case being reported by the province as of this morning. At the time our ECC was meeting, of course, we were watching for the variants, which the province is reporting on twice a week. At the time we met last Wednesday, there had only been 1 variant case reported in the Alberta Health Services North Zone, which is a pretty large territory covering from Cold Lake to Jasper and everywhere north above those 2 and outside the city of Edmonton. As of this morning, there are now 4 variant cases having been reported in the North Zone. And so I think the reminder there is that with these new variants that are more contagious, we need to continue to remain vigilant, following public health measures like masking in public, maintaining that physical separation. And so that will obviously be something that we'll be discussing at our ECC meeting this week. And we're also ensuring that as we near the 1-year anniversary of the ECC startup for the pandemic, pretty uncommon that you run an emergency coordination center for an entire year. We are ensuring that we're looking after the mental health of the participants, as I think a lot of the members of the public are also doing for themselves. Now is an opportune time for a bit of a check-in and to ensure that we're all doing the best that we can to support ourselves and one another with our mental health. Finally, I just wanted to relate to Council a little bit about administration's actions related to the announced stage 2 reopening that was announced by the province just yesterday afternoon. The province did announce that they are allowing libraries to reopen with, I believe it is 15% capacity. And they're also providing some reopening for fitness centers. And I know that council and the community are likely very interested in that and its impact on the activity center. I just wanted to relate some of the details that are contained in that, because if we simply heard the headline that the province has allowed a reopening of fitness centers, it might lead people to believe that we should be flinging the doors open and because there are no complications. And the truth is that it is actually a fairly complex set of requirements or decision-making that is required. They suggest that low-intensity individual group exercises are now allowed without a trainer, which is excellent. They specifically include examples of things like Pilates, stretching, Tai Chi, low-intensity yoga, light weightlifting, and indoor rock climbing. But they do mention that high intensity is only permitted for one-on-one training with a paid certified trainer. And so high intensity weightlifting, for example, is something that you must do with a paid trainer. So if you're only doing light weightlifting, you could do that on your own. If you're doing high intensity, heavy weightlifting, you would have to do that with a paid trainer. And so that's an example of something where there's probably a pretty fine line, and it may be challenging for users as they're walking into the facility to decide whether they're doing light weightlifting or heavy weightlifting. And administration is currently examining the regulations and the guidance from the province, and keeping in mind the direction that was provided from council last year. We will be coming out with some clear guidance and direction for the community later today or early tomorrow morning. We know that we're already getting questions about when the facilities are going to open, but we want to ensure that we are following the public health requirements as they've been published in all of their detail. And so I just wanted to pass that on to council, just to make you aware that the announced reopening does have some complications in detail. Administration is aware of it all and examining that, and will report back to council and the community on its impact on our ability to reopen the activity center and the facilities here. And with that, Your Worship, I had nothing else to report.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Any questions from councillors related to the ECC report? Apparently not. So thanks again, Mr. Given. We can turn to agenda item 5. Is there any business arising from the minutes of February 16th? Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. This doesn't arise from the minutes of February 16th, but I took it as reasonable to bring up something that came from some other previous minutes. And I am concerned because we are 2 months into the new year, and we set about at the end of 2020 to set the budget for 2021. And 2 months in, we have made no progress, at least as council. And I'm concerned about it. I'm afraid that we're going to get jammed up with major decisions upcoming, aside from the budget, and most importantly with the budget. So just wondering, first from administration, where we stand in terms of something coming back. For one thing, I know we were waiting maybe for some information on the disposition of the most funding, but it's been 6 months since the most funding was announced and we've heard nothing. So in the first instance, I'm wondering from administration if and when something is expected to come back to council. And secondly, I'm wondering if council wishes to be proactive and move forward with setting a tax requisition as we had discussed back in December. So I bring that up for comments from administration and also council.
Mr. Given.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship, to Councillor Butler's question. No, administration is fully aware that of the timelines that are required, and completely agrees that we don't want to be in a situation where council is faced with limited time to make significant decisions. We have been in a process of completing the year end. which will allow administration, actually has allowed administration to have a better understanding of what our actual results from the last year were and how much of the most funding we need to dedicate to essentially losses from last year that were unexpected and as a result of COVID. That information has been clarified. Administration has had a budget meeting last week, a full afternoon budget meeting where we reviewed the budget. We are making adjustments up to and including the announcement of the provincial budget, which will impact our 2021 MSI funding. And so there are some adjustments to be made there. But we are fully on track to be able to come to council with a budget meeting, specific focus budget meeting prior to the end of March. We are only at March 2nd, I realize, and so that leaves a lot of runway. I was just going to check to see with staff if we had a tentative date, because I believe we've discussed that. But certainly we will have a focus budget meeting where council will have an opportunity to discuss the budget and the recommendations coming from administration on utilization of the most funding. And we will have an opportunity for council to give some direction and then review the finalized budget at a regular council meeting, all before the end of March.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gibbon. Go ahead, Councillor Butler.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Given, for the update. I'm happy to hear that there is progress. We, I think, are all anxiously awaiting to get that conversation underway. I just have one follow-up question, if I could, please, and that is, so we passed in December an interim budget, and could you confirm that the organization is now operating under the 2020 operation budget allocations, and that we are working within that limited budget until we set a new budget for 2021.
Your Worship, to Councillor Butler's question, I will have to ask. It's my first time going through the interim budget process here in Jasper. I will be able to have an answer for you before the end of today's council meeting.
Well, that's not necessary. If it takes until our committee of the whole next week, that's fine with me, but I would like some certainty on that one point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Is there any other business arising? And in fairness to Councillor Butler, the agenda item says previous minutes, so I think it need not be restricted to the immediately previous minutes.
Thank you very much.
If there is nothing further, agenda item 6, department reports, there was nothing scheduled. I take it, Mr. Given, nothing has arisen.
No, Your Worship, but my team is fully in support of me here, and I am able to answer Councillor Butler's question, confirming that we are running under the 2020 approved budget numbers for the start of this year. That includes no new hires or no extra spending from the 2020 approved levels. So just wanted to follow up, but thanks very much to the team for being able to provide that information so quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
Thank you all for that. Thanks to the team. Agenda item 7, bylaws. We have simply the summary for information, which takes us to agenda item 8, requests for decision. We have 3 requests that have been before us previously as notices, are here now potentially at least for decision, beginning with agenda 8.1, the Connaught site servicing proposal. And Mr. Greathead is there, I see, but I will turn it to you, Mr. Given, if you want to introduce the topic.
Sure. Thanks very much, Mayor Ireland. I think Mr. Greathead and I both will be quite brief, considering council did previously see this. I'll just make the observation that this is an example of some of the factors that administration is currently working into the 2021 budget. You know, up until council deals with this today, administration doesn't yet have the clarity on whether or not you wish to include items like $350,000 in the 2021 budget for those upfront project costs. So I think council has had the full discussion about the project. I know there was some discussion about the viability of servicing individual sites separately. And there is, I would remind council, an incremental increase in cost that comes as a loss of the economies of scale. And that the reason for continuing on to parcel GA is really one of a technical requirement to do appropriate looping of the system. You need to ensure that the water doesn't have a dead end, so to speak. So I just, with those reminders and anything additional Mr. Greathead wanted to highlight about maybe some of the ongoing progress, because council and the community should know that this work isn't stopped and waiting. There is a significant amount of work that Mr. Greathead and the team are doing behind the scenes to advance this work so that we are prepared for any information that might come from the RHI grant. Mr. Greathead.
Thank you, Mr. Given, and good morning, Your Worship and Council. We have been progressing steadily along, going to get our permits for the trees. We've engaged Parks Canada for our approvals. We just got the pretty much the final draft of the consultant's report on the feasibility study. It's an 88-page document. Everything's going through quite rapidly, and we're making sure that we're not going to get hung up on any step along the way. Ideally, a quick approval of this project would be great, so that way we can actually start getting tools in the ground and bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Further questions about the report from council before I move to a motion? Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity. This was discussed last week, in Committee of the Whole, and I voted against the motion because the motion is very encompassing. There's only one item that I'm opposed to in there. So we have 3 items in the motion, and one of those items is broken down into 3. I'm opposed to spending the money to extend the services to GA because it could be a long time in the future, and I don't think it's fair to saddle the taxpayers with something that really, they're saying there's efficiencies. There really isn't. I mean, you're digging to put pipes in the ground. So how far you go is like, you're not going to save any big amount of money by stopping sooner. So I'm opposed to extending it to parcel GA, but I certainly support the proposal for the development of that area. It's a large property. It will provide our community with a lot of housing. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. I will say that I am certainly open to a motion when we get there to sever the request, and we could have separate motions on each one if that will aid. But thank you for those comments. Councillor Keller-Hempy.
Thank you, Mayor Arend. My question is to Mr. Given, may go to Mr. Greathead. I'm curious, when we dig up Connaught to go to parcel A, the old pipes at the end of Connaught near parcel A, will they be replaced at the same time?
Mr. Greathead can provide some information, but yes, there certainly are some valves that we're seeing significant challenges with, and those are a part of the scope should the project continue on past parcel A and connect there. John?
Your Worship and Council, there are, as Mr. Given said, some upsizing that needs to be done. Some of the T's and the crosses that are in the piping in the ground would need to be upsized. For example, replacing an 8x8 by 6 T, we're going to have to go to an 8x8 by 8 to get the sufficient flows in there. And particularly at the Willow intersection where we'd be tying in behind there, that intersection, those valves are in horrible shape. They're highlighted on our list of, to be replaced as soon as we get to them. With our valve replacement program, we can only tackle so many a year. But those ones that definitely, that intersection would need some pre-work to enable this to happen. And that's part of the what was proposed. I believe we had allocated $180,000 in the project for upgrading the intersection at Willow and where it would cut through. And I believe the other one was 120,000 at Spruce.
May I, Aaron?
Yep, go ahead.
You know, I know it's a lot of money up front, but if we're going to tear up the west end of Connaught, like, I think we should do the work all at once. And we have a lot of residents down there. We have 2 hotels down there. And if we're going to do it, this is the year to do it. You know, we have less traffic. We know the bus tours and everything will not be back this year. And to me, let's do the work. Let's get it done and save the residents and the businesses at that end of town, to not be doing this piece by piece. Do it at once. It saves money in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kelleher-MP. Councillor McGrath, had I seen your hand earlier? It was Councillor Butler then on my screen right below you. Councillor Butler, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will weigh in with agreement with Councillor Jeannot. I think that there's no doubt that we can anticipate both from a standpoint of demand and likelihood of meeting that demand, housing being developed on parcels GC and GB, sort of in a reasonable time frame of a decade or something like that. So I think that spend makes sense. Like Councillor Jeannot, I have a little trouble foreseeing the likelihood of enough demand for high density housing. I think it's important to remember that what we're talking about really here is suitable, much more suitable for high density apartment style housing than other kinds of housing. And there is demand for housing, a lot of demand for housing in Jasper, but perhaps the demand for high density housing has some sort of lifetime limit. So I'm in favor of proceeding with parcel to service parcel GB and GC, but myself, I find it hard to justify the additional spend on to service GA, where I think it pretty unlikely that we're going to see housing development in any kind of near future timeframe. And if it helps from a process standpoint, I'd certainly be prepared to make a motion following the recommendations, but omitting for the time being parcel GA. If it's helpful, I'll propose that motion for debate. I leave that to you, Your Worship.
I'm just trying to understand the specifics of the proposed motion. So would you simply amend bullet 1 to exclude parcel GA?
I would. We would also need to adjust the maximum borrowing. And I'm not sure how to do that, but we could approve a motion simply to for bullets 1 and 3, and we could then have administration come back with a borrowing estimate that we could agree to at a separate process. Might be one way to configure it.
Yes. Thank you. I will come back to motions. I wanted to give an opportunity for council to ask questions first before we get the motions on the table. So I will come back to that. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I have a question for, maybe it's Councillor Jeannot and Councillor Butler, or maybe it's for administration, but I'm hearing from administration that the importance of having GA included is for technicality reasons, not for necessarily building on GA, but that for this system and for the technicality of the system to work, GA is needed. And that's what I heard from the report. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm curious the debate angle on not agreeing to GA. If that's the professional advice that we're getting.
Mr. Given?
Yeah, certainly I can speak from an administration perspective. The recommendation is built on the requirement or need to reduce and eliminate the risk of water stagnation via dead ending, which would be much more challenging and costly, if not, and John can correct me, if not impossible, if just doing sites GB and GA. The additional challenge is with respect to firefighting capacity. In order to maintain the appropriate volume of water required for fire flows, for the hydrants, and for high density housing, as is likely on GB and GA parcel, or sorry, GC parcels, GC and GB parcels, we need to have a high volume of water coming into the site to be able to maintain that appropriate level of firefighting capacity. If we eliminate the connection at Willow, the lines coming into the site at Pine and Spruce are undersized for just the GB and GC parcels. So it is about having appropriate capacity to service the two parcels, GC and GB. And the best way to have that capacity without having to significantly upsize other lines along Spruce and Pine would be to have the additional flow coming from Willow as well. And so this is not about encouraging or supporting near-term development on GA. It is about maintaining appropriate fire flows, getting enough water to sites GB and GC, and ensuring that there's an appropriate loop that means that there is no risk of water stagnating in the lines, which provides a health risk. And so that's why the administration recommendation is for that looping past parcel GA, even though administration would completely agree with Councillors Journeau and Butler that there is no near-term likelihood of the GA parcel being developed for housing. This is really centered around the need to provide appropriate services to parcel GB and GC.
Thank you for that. Mr. Greathead, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Part of the consideration on this is that it is high density housing that we're looking at. So there is a potential if all 3 units or 3 lots were filled, there could be, heard the number 740 residents just in those 3 parcels of land. So that's why the water main that's proposed into that area is a 300 mil or a 12-inch water main. And it's going to be getting fed by a 6-inch water main, an 8-inch water main, and another one. So it's just going to be a demand on the system. And then we will have low pressure zones, in peak demand, that where we'd be drawing so much, or potentially could be drawing so much water from upstream. So this is just to make sure that there's an adequate supply. And again, to looping, as Mr. Given is one of the paramount guiding principles.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Go ahead, Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to argue into the technicalities of this, but right now we're proposing to develop 3 parcels, and we have 3 inputs of water line. I just don't understand why there might be a shortage with 2 lines for 2 lots, and I don't understand why there might be stagnation. I'm sure we can engineer our way around that. I just see the proposal for GA as being well into the future. And it's a lot of money to have our taxpayer pay for something that's not going to be used. And I don't see it as necessary because, again, I stress, we have 3 water lines for 3 properties. If we're only developing 2 properties, we should only need 2 water lines. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question of a technical nature, so to you, Mr. Given, but through you, I presume to Mr. Greathead. And it doesn't necessarily relate at all to the issues before us, but to the schematic. When we are looking at parcel GC, there is a long extension from the west end of GC to the tie-in, the existing tie-in at Hazel. So my question is, how is that Petro-Canada lot now serviced? Why is there not a tie-in close to the east side of GC? And if there is not something already there servicing that Petro-Canada lot, are they a beneficiary of this project, and ought we be looking for some sort of contribution from them?
I will pass that, Your Worship, to Mr. Greathead. He does have the details.
Your Worship, they do have a service line coming through, and it comes in by through the alley on Patricia, and pretty much goes straight across. At one point, we were quite excited, thinking we'd be able to actually tie into that line, and that could be a shorter run than having to cross Hazel. But then once we realized it was only a 2-inch service, that would be insufficient. It'd be negligible, you know, the flow we would get from that.
All right, thank you for that. It was just a curiosity. On the general matter, I suppose I'm prepared to wait until we have the motion, but my sense of the project is to support the recommendation for all 3 lots. It seems to me that we are here to advance the interests of the community overall, and this better positions the community for the future. The more we delay it at this end, the longer it will be delayed. We had that discussion last week to some extent, and that is, until it's serviced, there is going to be less interest in developers, and therefore a delay now, I think, just extends the delay. I think this should not be an issue of putting current residents and future residents at odds. We are one community. We have a duty to advance the overall interest of the community, and I think that is best served by facilitating the infrastructure to lots, and then we'll see what happens in the future. But we can better position the community for success by approving, I think, all 3 lots. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I agree completely. I think that your words were perfect, and I trust administration's recommendation is based on sound technical advice and professional expertise. And I'm happy with the recommendation as it's been proposed by administration, and I'm happy to move a motion forward if no one else would like to move that motion.
If we are at that stage, first, any other questions for information? If not, I'm going to turn to Councillor Butler, who had indicated his desire to make a motion early on. And so I think he should be afforded that opportunity. And then we can also deal with the question of severance of the 3 aspects of the proposed recommendation, if that's the will of council. So Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. You know, I'm going to decline the opportunity, and here's the reason. I've been looking over this and thinking about it and discussing it with a few people in town since it came to us. And my problem is that what we're hearing today about the necessity of all 3 feeds in order to provide enough water pressure is not what was indicated in the RFD. The RFD is quite clear that a number of factors suggest that servicing all 3 sites at the same time is the best option. These include savings to be realized to support the private sector interest in near-term development and minimizing disruption on Connaught Drive. And so this is the first that I've been aware that really to provide adequate water service for GC and GB that we need to do the whole project. And that changes the picture for me quite considerably, not least because that should be a major consideration when it comes time to cost recovery, potential cost recovery from development of GB. If so much underground infrastructure is necessary to service GB, then the community should have the expectation that we might recover that from GB. And I don't know if that's a reasonable expectation. I'm surprised to discover that what appears to be the most compelling argument to proceed with the entire project is actually one of necessity to do the job right, rather than the possibility of phasing it as it has been brought to us in the RFD, where clearly the possibility of approving some of this utility servicing in a future year is contemplated, with no attachment of necessity for fire servicing or adequate water pressure. I agree we don't want to provide a dead end, but the option of servicing GC and GB without GA does not produce a dead end. So I'm pretty confused by what I see as a change in the structure or the details of the recommendation from last week to this week. So I once again find myself really sitting here not certain what is the right way to go.
I see Councillor McGrath and Councillor Demota. I didn't know whether there was a question in there for administration. If I don't see administration's hands go up, I will turn then to Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I have one question regarding process. I'm prepared to make a motion soon, but before I make that motion, I want to be clear that should this motion be defeated, would that not allow the alternative recommendation of approving utility services of just GC in the future?
I believe it would. If the motion is all encompassing, then a lesser motion would not be the same motion and would be acceptable.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Demota.
I don't know if I want to start charting astute observations for 2021 going forward, but Councillor Butler's observation seems to be the most insightful thing I've heard in the last 2 months, and that's really put me on the fence. And I'm a self-proclaimed fence sitter to start with, so this really puts it a little bit more difficult for me to make a decision on today or even to vote. So I heard from him initially and Councillor Trudeau, and what Councillor Keller-Empey said made a lot of sense to me, because of the opportunity to get that work done now. And now, it's just it's difficult because I'm confused, and Councillor Butler's latest observation is a very compelling reason why. So I'm having a difficult time weighing what I want to do. Thank you.
Councillor Journeau, and then Councillor. Councillor Journeau, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to recommend that we amend this request to exclude parcel GA. The arguments are, yes, technical and so on and so forth, but if this was a private enterprise, there's no way a private entrepreneur would put services for something that may not be used for decades. So that's how I view it as a caretaker of the taxpayers' dollars, and that's one of the reasons why I just don't see it. The bigger we make the project, the more complicated it gets, and so on and so forth. So to me, there is no savings there. So I would like to propose an amendment to exclude parcel GA and only move ahead with the developments of parcel GC and GB, and that the borrowing requirements be adjusted accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Butler and then Councillor Keller.
So thank you. Following up on Mayor's observation that I didn't have a question before, now I do. So I have two questions around the concern that I raised there. The first is that if we undertake the portion described as servicing parcel GC only, which includes a tie-in at Spruce, will there be adequate water pressure to service the entirety of GC with respect to domestic water and fire? And then the second part of my question is, if we pass parcel GB and tie in at Pine, will there then be adequate water service for both those purposes to both GC and GB? So in the first instance, do we have enough water to GC if we only do that? If we only go past GB, do we have enough water there? If the answer to the second question is no, then the GC option or GA option isn't about GA at all. It's really about GB.
Mr. Kivett.
Your worship, Councillor Butler hit the nail on the head. The GA portion is not about GA at all. It is about GB. That is 100% correct. The first part of Councillor Butler's question was, can we move forward with GC only, and will there be enough capacity for GC only? Yes, 100%. That option is contained in the report and would at a cost of $1.84 million specified. You will also see in the report that GA and GB move together because moving past GA is required to have enough capacity to add on the GB site. That's why administration did not present an option of GC only or GC plus GB, because that is not possible. That's why the report that you received was laid out the way that it was.
Thank you for that. I think it was Councillor Keller-Hrenpe and then Councillor McGrath.
My question was answered, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you. Councillor McGrath.
Just one more point of clarification, if I may. If we move this motion forward and we were to move this project forward today, that's not to say that we cannot recuperate costs for this infrastructure in the future for GB. That's absolutely my intention as a councillor, is to recuperate the funds necessary to bring underground infrastructure to GB from potential developers of GB in the future. But this is the first step today in the municipality acquiring this infrastructure and allowing this affordable housing and density to be built in our community, which I perceive as council's single most important issue in this term.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Journeau, you had indicated a desire to make a motion slightly different than the recommendation. If you are interested, I would now entertain that motion, but is that a motion then to install only for GC and not B or A as a unit, or B and A as a unit?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a good way to twist the argument around to make me vote in favor.
Well, I hadn't intended that, but if your motion is to exclude it or reduce it to GC and GB, that's fine.
No, my motion was to reduce it, yes, to 2 lots, exclude GA. That was my motion.
Okay. All right. And with subsequent then changes to the other bullet points, the dollar amounts would change and the allocation for the 2021 budget would change. I'm not sure of those amounts. I don't know whether anybody can help us with those amounts. Mr. Given?
Sure. So to be clear, Mayor Ireland, if Councillor Journeau's intended motion is that council approve installation of utility services to the GC and GB parcels in 2021, if
Yes.
that's the intent of the motion, no, administration does not have that cost available because it is not a technically feasible approach for the reasons previously discussed.
Thank you. Councillor Juneau, I'm still prepared to entertain that motion if that's the motion you want to make.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Doesn't look like it's going to pass. There's all kinds of oppositions to it, both technical and political. So I will withdraw that request.
Thank you, Councillor Demota.
I think I'm good on that. Now that Councillor Jeannot has changed his course that way. Many of us during the last campaign season made commitments to promote housing in the community. And I think that not going forward with supplying services to GB will hinder any progress that we intended in the past. And I think that the economy of scale here is important. And I think that I would be in favor of the recommendation. I'm more grounded that way now with the conversation. So that's where I'm leaning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. A motion, I presume.
Hopefully, yes. I'd like to make a motion that council approve installation of utility services to the GC, GB, and GA parcels in 2021. Direct administration to develop the borrowing bylaws required to fund Connaught site utility services to a maximum of 3.647 million and present them at a future regular meeting of council, and allocate $350,250 in the 2021 budget for the upfront project costs for the Connaught Drive affordable housing apartments, subject to approval of the Rapid Housing Initiative grant application.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. That will be the motion. I'm going to ask first, and Mr. Given, I might ask you for your assistance. I think if any councillor requests division, we can divide without a motion. I was just trying to check, I think it's Schedule 3, but is there any desire by any councillor to separate the three aspects of that motion and call three separate questions? All right, if there is not, then that is the question. Is there any further debate on the question? Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor McGrath, for putting the motion forward. I think really all I want to say is that I have come around to agreeing with those that think we should go ahead with the full thing. I have to actually apologize that I misinterpreted the situation and sort of got my head around thinking that there were three options available where there really are only two, and where I said that administration had not clarified the need for the additional looping. It's implicit in the way that is implicit in the way this is actually presented. So I just wanted to step away a little from saying that I was dissatisfied to hear what seemed to me like new arguments brought forward, and it wasn't. So as much as it is a lot of money, really what it runs down to is about almost a little over $1.8 million to service the first site GC and another $2 million to service the second site GB. And that's what it costs. It's a lot of money, but it's what it costs. And if we are, as has been said by a couple of other councillors, going to position ourselves to encourage development of housing, I think we need to do it. Breaking it down to do the second phase down the road some ways, I think just puts us in an awkward position for the potential sale and moving forward on GB. So I'm in favor. We will fund it through debenture. It will be paid for over a period of time by the community, and the need for housing is clear. So I find myself in favor.
Councillor Demota.
Well, even though Councillor Butler is apologetic, I'm grateful that you brought up that discussion, and I think it was really healthy for us to go through that and get a better understanding of what the overall plan is and the implications of going forward with it. So thank you very much for addressing those concerns. So it really helped me. Thank you.
Councillor Juneau, is your hand up or are you pondering?
Glad you could read that body language. I'm only pondering. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, if there's nothing further, then I will call the question. I won't reread it, the motion, but it is 3 parts and it is to service all 3 parcels, GA, GB, GC with the relevant numbers. All in favor? Opposed? I'm going to take that, Councillor Butler, as in favor. Yes, it was a little
Oh,
late.
was I slow? Yes, I'm in favor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That motion is carried. Which takes us to agenda item 8.2. Wastewater treatment plants, RFP, Mr. Given.
Your Worship, I'll just introduce to say that the report is the same as was reviewed by Committee of the Whole last week. I just want to make a note that administration did hear you make the motion, Your Worship, at the committee meeting. As you'll see in the recommended motions list at the end of our council agenda, we have adjusted the phrasing to match the motion that was made at committee. So just wanted, we had to have a little bit of a discussion about that because the motion that you made, of course, doesn't amend the report, but it does amend the recommendation coming forward from committee. And so you'll see that the phrasing is consistent in the report, but administration did capture your motion that was made, which essentially removed the name of the party, doesn't change the intent of the report or the recommendation, but just wanted to ensure that council saw that we were aware of that and had a discussion about whether we should adjust the report or not. And we thought that the recommended motions list at the end of the council agenda is the right way to do it.
Thank you, appreciate it. Are there any further questions from councillors related to the RFP? Councillor Keller-Grampi.
I do apologize. I probably should have asked this last week, but I did look up Aquatara on the website, and I noticed they didn't have any listings of other wastewater treatment plants that I was just wondering, as there's none also listed in the report, like kind of the experience behind this company and why administration promoted them. I'm just curious.
Sure, Your Worship, to Councillor Keller-Grampi's question, can certainly refer that to Mr. Greathead. I know that there are a number of situations where Aquaterra has multiple connected water treatment plants to a single system, and they also operate other water treatment plants under contract for other municipalities. And Mr. Greathead might be able to provide some insight on which ones the
Thank you, Council. Your Worship. Going through that, they wouldn't have, if they hadn't had the experience of operating similar, equal or better plants than ours, they would not have made cut for the process. That was investigated heavily. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact facilities, but I know that they are operating the Hinton one currently, and the references that we followed up on all checked out quite well. So we do believe that they do have capacity, and there was no concern raised at all during the review process or the evaluation process when we went through that. I hope that answers it.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Given.
Sure, Your Worship. Appreciating Councillor Keller MP's question, administration didn't think it was appropriate at this time to invite a proponent to be making a presentation to council. We'd propose that at the conclusion of the contract negotiations and before council is asked to ratify the contract, we would invite that proponent to come forward at that time and make a presentation to council where you could ask them any questions firsthand, just so that council could have ultimate confidence before agreeing to enter into a contract. We just thought at this time, while we're still in evaluation, we didn't want necessarily to have somebody here today making that presentation. We thought it was more appropriate a little bit further along in the process.
I would invite any member of council to make the motion. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. That was not meant to be an offer to make the motion. I had a comment, but if you prefer the motion on the table, I will wait. I guess
I'd broken in before you brought my attention.
I struggle a little bit because this is going to be a huge contract, the largest contract the municipality will have in place. It's a 10-year contract, and I understand and appreciate the necessity for various reasons around privacy to not have more information in front of us. Most specifically, some kind of a number. But if there is a negotiation to be had around what that number looks like, I realize, as we have encountered time and time again on questions of capital spending, that putting a number on the table is in no one's best interest. At the same time, I struggle a little bit with my representative hat on to feel that we as council are in a position to exercise due diligence. I trust the process, but it is a huge contract, a big ask, and a tremendous amount of implication attaches to it. I guess I'm comforted a little if what we're really doing is simply allowing administration to enter into negotiations. But I think it's very important that we proceed down that route without foregone conclusion, and that council have an opportunity to have a good in-depth look at the outcome before we proceed, even if that means of necessity looking at some of it for privacy reasons in camera. Because it's a huge ask with not a lot of detailed information in front of us. I understand again the necessity and will vote in favor, but on the understanding that we are really just at this point proceeding with the negotiation.
Mr. Given, I see you nodding, and I take it that is you're affirming that position that this will be direction to negotiate, but not to enter into a contract.
Yes, Your Worship, that's 100% correct. As you'll see, it is phrased direct administration to enter into negotiations. But I appreciate the point that Councillor Butler's making. It is a significant consequence for the community. And I appreciate his acknowledgement that there's a reason why the information was presented the way it was. There is more information that is available. And I think it would be possible for administration, while the negotiations are underway, to have an in-camera session with council, maybe to provide a little bit greater detail on the results. I think that that's not an unreasonable request, a very, I think a wise request. That way council can also be more informed about questions they may wish to ask when administration brings a recommended contract forward for council approval. So I appreciate Councillor Butler's concern. I think administration can support council in their decision making by providing an update to council, a little bit of a clarifying or more detailed report on the scoring and outcomes, so that council is in a better position to ask those questions of the recommended proponent prior to entering into the contract. So I hope that would give council the comfort that they would need. Again, with the understanding that this direction is only to enter into those negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, Mr. Given. I appreciate that, and I agree that that's a reasonable way forward. I think our community would expect that council would look at this in some detail and just perform an additional level of due diligence beyond what is just seen here on the RFD. So with that in mind, I'm happy to make the motion that council direct administration to enter into contract negotiation with Aquaterra Utilities Incorporated for a 10-year operating contract of the Jasper Wastewater Treatment Plant.
Might I have you, Councillor Butler, accept a friendly amendment to reword that to enter into contract negotiation with the identified successful applicant? That was the change that Mr. Given referenced early on, and it is not identical to what is in the report because the report didn't change. But
Right.
we were trying to sculpt this a little bit to remove the name.
So
You'll accept that as a friendly amendment?
I will accept that amendment, and the entire community will pretend that we don't know who we're entering into contract negotiations with. Sorry, I did miss that. I was reading from the RFD. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further debate on the motion? Right, I will say I am certainly going to be in favor of the motion, but I wanted to use this opportunity to again thank administration for the way this was handled. As Councillor Butler indicated in his previous questions, this is a substantial contract, probably the most substantial contract that this or just about any council will ever enter into. And so the way this has been presented, I think has been admirable. The time, effort, and the expense, admittedly, of the RFP and the way you engaged the consultant to speak to us a couple of weeks ago. You brought it forward again for robust discussion last week, and it's here again before us. I think that's exactly the way items of this magnitude ought to be approached, and I do appreciate that there will be further in-camera discussions, but the process, I think, has been most admirable, and I thank Mr. Given and all of your team and the consultant as well for getting us to this point.
Thanks, Your Worship. I feel
Any further discussion, debate on the motion? If not, I will call the question. Sorry, Mr. Given.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm sorry. I was just really wanted to be very, very clear. This process was started well before my arrival. It is Mr. Greathead, the utilities team, and my predecessor that started off this really robust process. So just to be very clear, I'm happy to have come into a process that was so well started and to be able to participate in it at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor DeBota.
Thank you. And to add to what you said, Mr. Mayor, and what Mr. Given has said, since Mr. Greathead's arrival here, we've seen a lot of positive progress in this area, and you know, I'm more comfortable with what's on the table and his recommendations and moving forward with this. So we've made a lot of improvements there, and I think we're in good hands. We're in better hands for sure, and I hope that you know, through this negotiation that you know, Jasper will see a really good product. So thank you to everyone, and you know, Mr. Greathead, great job so far.
All right, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you for that. Agenda item 8.3, Healthy Communities Funding Application. Again, I will turn first to you, Mr. Given, and through you to whomever.
Sure, Your Worship. First off, For me, I think it's appropriate when an error has been made to identify that up front. I'll just say that we caught one after this had gone to committee that should have been immediately obvious, but it wasn't to me and I missed it. The total amount of the recommendation should be for $250,000, not 260. It is a simple math error that got carried forward without, on my part, without catching it. And so the table that's there, I can advise council that the recommendation should be wayfinding improvements at $20,000. So there was just a miscalculation that got carried through the report. I didn't catch it before the committee meeting last week, and I just wanted to correct the record and to be able to give council an opportunity to correct the motion that you may consider today.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gibbon. And so do I take it that both numbers are wrong? It is a $250,000 grant opportunity, and our expectations add up to $250,000, not 260. Okay. Discussion? Motion? Councillor McGrath?
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I move that council approve the submission of an application to the Healthy Communities Initiative in the amount of $250,000 for improvements to the public spaces within the town site.
Thank you for that. Do you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor McGrath?
Well, I'd like to thank administration for first off finding this grant and for taking all opportunities to apply for any grants available to both enhance the accessibility and the nature of our community. So thank you very much for landing on this, and I hope we're successful in achieving it.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Any further debates? I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you. That takes us to agenda item 9. We have no correspondence for information, consideration, or action at today's meeting. Agenda item 10, other new business. Is there any other new business councillors wish to raise? Councillor Demota?
Well, I wanted to report in the down the list here on the agenda about my attendance for the next educated officials education program, elected officials education program, EOEP. However, when I went to go and look through our policy, it appears that we need to have approval if we want to attend the upcoming courses. So thank you to Mr. Gibbon for forwarding the courses coming up, Council's role in service delivery and Council's role in strategic planning, which are available on Thursdays during March and April. And I did sign up. And I just want to be on side because we are at the last regular meeting before the first one, which is on this Thursday night, March 4th. So it appears that through our policy that if we want to attend, that even though it would maybe be within our budget allocations, that we need approval by council. And that's a policy B-003. Anyway, to be on the safe side, if it's all right with council, if there's any discussion, I would like to put forward a motion for any of us that would like to attend, including myself.
That's fine.
Okay.
So the motion is that those councillors wishing to attend those virtual sessions through AUMA, the elected education program.
Yeah, so I have it here. Be it resolved that council approve the attendance of any councillor who wishes to attend the upcoming EOEP courses, council's role in service delivery, and council's role in strategic planning.
Thank you for that motion. Is there a known cost to enrollment?
Yeah, I believe it was $275 per course. Per counselor. Do we have to address the amounts?
No, I'm just curious. I know that I saw the email as well, but I couldn't remember it, knowing that I would not be available on Thursday. In any event, that is the motion. Is there any further debate? I will call the question then. All those in favor? And through that process, we lost Councillor McGrath. The motion is in any event, but I cannot record her vote. She was absent for the vote due to technical reasons. And Councillor Demota, you had that motion prepared. I would invite you to send that to administration just so they can confirm the wording without having to go back and listen to an entire YouTube presentation. Is there any other new business? Councillor McGrath is back, and I have called again for other new business. Councillor McGrath, in case you missed that.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I have no new business and I apologize. My audio was disconnected.
Well, agenda item 11 then, councillor reports. Are there councillor reports to deliver? Go ahead then, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I attended the community conversation last Wednesday and I plan to be at the community conversation again tomorrow. We as the library board are working on rescheduling a meeting that was originally planned for the 10th, which I'll keep you in the loop for, Mr. Given, because I believe you were planning on attending. And we're trying to move that forward so that we can plan a possible reopening or reopening plans of the library. Thank you.
I will report that Councillor Wilson and I attended a West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority Board meeting last week. The group currently operates under a memorandum of agreement, the county and 4 municipalities, and we are administered effectively, at least under the town of Hinton. We have agreed to retain, or at least to put out an RFP looking for consultants to give us some options with respect to altering our governance structure. Specifically, 2 alternatives are required to be in the report. There could be more, but we are looking at the possibility of conversion to either a waste management authority in a proper sense or a commission, or possibly something else. So the RFP has just gone out. We are looking for a final report by the 1st of August, although we have attempted to incentivize the potential applicants to give us something a little bit earlier so that by summer, early summer, or the latest midsummer, the board will have received a report. We'll make a determination hopefully by September, and then that will come back to individual councils for ratification. So sort of long-term for the time being, 6 months out roughly, you can anticipate that there will be something before our council to consider a change of governance station at the West Yellowhead Regional Waste Management Authority. So just keep that sort of on the distant radar for yourselves. That is my report. Are there any further reports? All right, agenda of upcoming events. As we roll through COVID, there is nothing significant upcoming, except the rollout of vaccines, which is all positive. If there is nothing further, then I would invite a motion to adjourn at 10:45. Councillor DeMota, your motion?
Sure.
Not going to invite debate.
Surprised.
All in favor? Slow response, but everyone was in favor of adjourning. Thank you all. We are adjourned. Enjoy what you can of the remainder of the day. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone.